sit down and talk to me.
You're welcome.
And as I said, we're looking for some stories, so we're going to start out at the very beginning. Before the war, before the Army, what were you doing for a living?
Well, I was in high school. I lied about my age to get in the National Guards in 1939. I was with the 38th Infantry Division, 150th Field Artillery Battalion here in the state of Indiana, up in Kokomo. And in January of 1941, our division was called 1 year of active duty and shipped us to Mississippi, where the 37th Division from Ohio, we call them the Flamin' Apples. They had gone down there in October of 1940, so their 1 year of active duty training was up in October of 41. Like I said, I was in high school, and I was a mid-termer, thank goodness, because I actually graduated mid-term in uniform, and our Sargasso for that year. The picture of all of us is about 5 or 6 enlisted men and a couple of officers, and my battery commander was also my history teacher. They experimented with the light aircraft, using it as an observation post in the air on the Louisiana maneuvers in 1940. 1941, summer, fall of 1941, and it proved successful. Well, at Camp Shelby, they sent some of our vehicles to Louisiana to bring back personnel from the 37th Infantry Division, and I went along as an assistant driver on a 2.5 ton truck. They didn't have enough vehicles to transport all our people back to Camp Shelby. And on the side of their vehicles, they had OHIO. They were from Ohio. That also stood for Over the Hill in October, because that was when their 1 year of active duty training was up, and they were told that they were not going to be released at the end of 1 year. So that was an interesting, and of course some of them did go over the hill, and some of our people went over the hill from the 38th. But after Pearl Harbor, which was of course 7 December 41, why our year wasn't up until a month later, so we were in for the duration. And I was a gunner corporal on a 155 howitzer gun, and then later became gun sergeant, and then became staff sergeant in charge of the entire 4-gun section. It was about that time that my battery commander asked me if I was interested in going to OCS, and I said certainly. So he accompanied me to have an interview with the Brigadier General, Division Artillery Commander. Interviewed with him, and a couple of weeks, I don't know how long, 2 or 3 weeks later, I had orders to report to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I attended and became a 90-day wonder. The school lasted 90 days, and so that's where they got the term 90-day wonders. Got my commission as second lieutenant on the 18th day of November, 42. And I had a rough time getting through OCS. So I thought, well, maybe I better, if I'm going to get my commission, I need to set this story straight. And so I told my TAC officer that I had lied to get in the National Guards, and I wanted to get that straight if I was going to get a commission. He said, well, I'll make an arrangement for you to talk to he was a general, brigadier general, don't remember who, but went and talked to him, told him I thought I'd better get this story straight. If I was lucky enough to complete the course, so I didn't want to lie hanging over my head. So I told him the story, and he said, forget about it. He said, I lied to get in the Army way back when I was young. He said, go on back to your classes. So I graduated and became a second lieutenant in the artillery. Shipped me to Fort Knox, Kentucky. 8th Armored Division, I think, was there at that time, about ready to ship out. So what was left became a part of the 20th Armored Division, and we went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky, what was left of us. And while there, after 2 or 3 months, they were looking for company grade officers to volunteer to go to flight school and become a liaison pilot. I'll go. So I put in my application, and a couple of weeks later I received orders. Shipped me to detached service to the Army Air Corps in Pittsburgh, Kansas, because it was a commercial training school. I say commercial. It was all commercial except the test pilot that gave us our check rides, and that lasted about 8 weeks, I think. I don't recall exactly. Taught us how to fly. Never been in a plane before, and from there we received our rating as a liaison pilot at that time, and so they shipped us back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where they said, okay, the Army Air Corps has taught you how to fly this thing. Now we're going to teach you how to get in and out of short fields and land and take off on roads and that sort of thing. And it later paid off in combat. It certainly did. On completion of my training at Fort Sill, I was assigned to the 12th Armored Division. It was on maneuvers in Tennessee at that time. This was in 1943. So from Tennessee maneuvers, we flew our aircraft to Camp Markley, Texas, where we were until we shipped overseas. Some of the other pilots were Tom Kelly. John W. Gibbons was our air officer. The other pilot in my battalion was George Lindley, who was shot down in Germany. Mention that later. He was the other pilot in my battalion. There was a Glover.
Maurice Glover.
Okay, yeah, I think that's right. We called him Dumpy Crenshaw. He was a staff sergeant pilot. He was one of the people that, I don't know whether I mentioned it or not, when it first started, young men that had already a civilian pilot rating, they said, we'll give you a staff sergeant rating if you enlist in the Army and become a pilot for one of our Cubs. So he, I don't remember his first name. Crenshaw was his last name, though, and we called him Dumpy because he wasn't very tall. And another one of the staff sergeant pilots was a guy by the name of Donovan. And so we trained there at Camp Barkley until 44, fall of 44, when they shipped us out to by train to New York for travel troop convoy. I don't know, probably 10 or 15 ships, maybe more than that. I don't remember for sure. Going to England. The D-Day had already taken place, so we arrived in England. Our Cubs arrived in crates, and we had to put them together and test fly them. And I told my sergeant, you're going with me on that test flight, so let's make sure we get it together right. And we had to wait about 2 weeks or so for good weather to fly the channel, for the English channel getting into France. The rest of the division had already gone by ship, LST, I'm not sure what, but by ship. And so we joined our outfit in in northern France. They billeted us, some of us, I know, myself and one of the other men in the air section, in French quarters. The farmer didn't have any say about it. They didn't like it, but it turned out all right. We were with them about 2 weeks, and eventually they fed us dinner one night and had Calvados, I think it was. Man, it was a strong drink. And wine, cider, was real good. And one of our pilots, in fact, I think it was George Lindley, had an extra pair of boots. And one of their sons, he was barefooted. And when he gave that boy that pair of boots, they couldn't do enough for us, you know. Well, from there we joined our unit. Paris had already been liberated, and it seemed like we went into the war somewhere around Alsace-Lorraine, I think. I don't recall for sure. And then we went down to the Colmar pocket, and I remember we we liberated our division, liberated the concentration camp at Landsberg, and I had a picture. I have a picture at home or two of that. I took pictures of the bones that were there, and in that area, one day I was in our Jeep, and another Jeep was coming from the opposite direction, and I saw a guy drinking, I was pretty sure it was champagne, and so I stopped him. I said, "Hey, where'd you get that?" And he said, "There's a German down on the Mains River that has a barge full of French champagne." He said, "All you have to do is go down and sign your name and organization, and he'll even load the vehicle for you." I said, "You gotta be kidding." "No," he said, "I'm not kidding." So I go on back to our little airfield, which wasn't too far away. I don't remember exactly where it was. And I told George Lindley, I said, "George, I want you to take I was a little bit senior to him. I said, I want you to take the driver." I told him where it was. "Go down to that barge on the Mains River and get the champagne. Load it up with champagne for us." He said, "George," he said, "you found out where it was." He said, "You go." And he said, "I'll take the first flight tomorrow morning. And when you get back, why, you can come up and relieve me." And he said, "You know where it is. You heard about it." He said, "You go." So 3 of us did. Driver, I don't know why 2 guys went with me, but they did. A driver, another guy, and myself. And the Jeep we had winterized plyboard, I think. Anyway, we get down there, and sure enough, German had his laborers load champagne for us, and we got 25 cases of champagne in that Jeep with the 3 of us going back to our unit. And I signed my name. I didn't sign my name. I signed the guy's name that I knew was in the Pacific that I'd served with when I was in the Guards, because they went that direction. And some fictitious outfit, and he probably collected after the war. I don't know, but but we had our champagne. I got back that day. I get in my plane and go up to relieve George Lindley, and we contacted one another. And he said, "Okay," he said, "you got it. I'll go on back to the airfield." He was shot down by, we think it was an ME-109 on the way back to the airfield. We didn't find out about it for a couple of hours, and we started looking for him, and we spotted the wreckage, and we had a small tank that was helping guard our airfield, our little airstrip. So we took that tank and drove over to the nearest little town, little village, and they had George in Cornish. Don't remember his first name. Kenneth? No. Yeah. Cornish was his last name. Second lieutenant, observer. They had them both in cold storage, but their 45s were gone. That was the only weapon we had. Their binoculars were gone. Their watches gone. What money they had was gone. The only thing they hadn't taken was their wedding rings. And I had met both of their wives at Camp Barkley. So I asked John Givens, our air officer, I said, John, how about me taking their rings, wedding rings? And I said, if I live through the war, I'll take them back to their wives when I get back to the States. And I said, go ahead, George. He said, they probably wouldn't make it if they went in, went through the channel going back anyway. So I took the 2 wedding rings, and after the war, the wife and I wasn't married at the time. We got married in May of 1946, and we spent our honeymoon taking the wedding rings back to Lindley's wife and Cornish's wife. Lindley lived in Tennessee, and Cornish lived outside of Pittsburgh, or in Pittsburgh. And the wives were grateful to get the rings back. Lindley's wife had already remarried, just a little over a year, but she had already remarried. And Cornish and his wife was happy to get the ring. She had not remarried. She had a baby. Both of them had babies. And but his mother, Cornish's mother, said she wouldn't even talk to us. She said, "My son's coming back," and she wouldn't talk to us. But the other family members were grateful. Of course, our outfit ended up in Austria, just barely in Austria, and then we went into occupation duty. Was there in occupation duty a couple of months, and they said, message came through, we're looking for volunteers to go fight in the Pacific. If you volunteer, we'll give you 30 days in the States. I said, I'll go. And so I volunteered for that, received orders, and went across Germany into France, met an old buddy on the way, and ended up at Camp Lucky Strike on the west coast of France, awaiting transportation back to the States. While there, but a week or two, when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And so a couple of weeks later, the next one was dropped on Nagasaki. And so I was already in the pipeline to come back to the States. And so I arrived back and was processed at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. And they said, if you know you want to stay in the Army, you have to wait until tomorrow. If you want to go home, you can go home today. I said, I'm going home today. So I did. I was discharged, went to Kokomo, because our hometown was just north of here, about 50 miles. I was out 3 years to the day. I volunteered, came back on active duty December the 4th of 1948, and was shipped directly to Japan. And I was fat, dumb, and happy on the island of Kyushu. And on that island is the city of Nagasaki. That was the second atomic bomb was dropped. So we were there, fat, dumb, and happy when the war broke out in Korea. So I don't know whether you want to go through that or not, but that.
As much as you want to talk about?
Well,
absolutely.
We had to put, since you're a pilot and have flown small aircraft, to get from Japan to Korea, we had to put a gas tank, tied it to the rafters of the, and a tube going down to our gas tank with a turn-off switch over here. And so when the old wire dropped a little bit, we turned the spigot and wire came back up, and so we had enough fuel to get from Japan to Korea. And had to turn back one day because of weather. The next day, 3 of us took off to go again, and one, Jim Good, he turned back, and a guy by the name of Kenny Glover, not the same one. He was a pilot. My Cub was a little bit slower. For some reason, it was a little bit slower than the rest of them. I was in back of them, and when we saw this wall of weather in front of us, but we could see the top of it, they turned around and went back. I started climbing, and so I got up above the overcast, and one of those dumb bunnies turned around and followed me. If he'd kept going back, I'd have probably turned back, but he followed me, and we flew for, oh my goodness, it seemed like forever, but it was probably only about an hour, hour and a half, and only had the compass to go by, nothing else. And saw an opening in the clouds, and man, there was land down there, and boy, I went down through the clouds, and we landed on the coast, the east coast of Korea. And man, the people came out, hundreds of them, just out, it seemed like out of nowhere. And we weren't sure whether it was North or South Korea, but a couple of them came out with weapons, and they were friendly. It was South Korea. And so we, and they wanted to punch the aircraft. And of course, you start punching a fabric, you can punch your hole through a fabric aircraft. So this one guard, keep them stay away. So they did. And he couldn't speak English, this one, and went through the motion of doing this, and a telephone. Oh yeah. And so one of them took us up to their CP, I guess you'd call it, and they had a field telephone there, and cranked it. Couldn't get anybody, and he had some English that he knew. The only English he said. I can't say the words, she's here. You want me to actually say it? He slammed that field phone down, no fucking good. And he tried it 2 or 3 times, but that was the only English that he knew. So, we'd had advisors there in Korea before the war broke out. And we evacuated them on the island, you can listen now, on the island of Kyushu. And our General Dean was our division commander of the 24th Infantry Division at that time. I'd met him once or twice. And he was, our units went in piecemeal, and boy, we were pretty well chopped up piecemeal. General Dean was captured within the first week or so of the operation in Korea. We thought he very likely was killed. We found out after the war, after the armistice was signed, we didn't win, stalemate. He was one of the POWs that was released. And a couple of years later, I was assigned to the Presidio of San Francisco. A brother-in-law was visiting me, never been in the military. The liquor store was over at Treasure Island. We didn't have one at the Presidio. We went over to buy some liquor, and I heard in the liquor store, I heard someone say, "General Dean, sir." I'm in civvies, and I said, "Come on, Charlie." Brother-in-law, I said, "Someone I want you to meet." So walked over and I said, "General Dean, sir." And he turned around and he said, "Well, hello, Poppas." He said, "How are you?" And boy, you could knock me over with a feather. Well, I introduced my brother-in-law to him. Brother-in-law said, "I'm not going to wash my hand." But General Dean later wrote a book and stated in that book the way he kept from going batty while he was a POW was trying to place names with faces that he remembered. And there have been 50 to probably 56 when I saw him the next time, and I'd only met him once or twice, and yet he remembered my name. Amazing, amazing. I was fortunate. I spent about 13 months, 12, 13 months in Korea. Came back, got back. My wife stayed in Japan while I was in Korea. We came back on a troop ship. her in one, what do you call it, stateroom, and me in another. We weren't in the same, didn't have a cabin to ourselves on the way back. And after I got back from Korea, I became helicopter qualified, and later spent 2 years in Taiwan, Formosa, and later, while assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, I had orders for Europe, and even found out where I was going to be assigned at Heidelberg, which was a choice assignment. And somebody that had some pull wanted that assignment that was a pilot, because I was going to be the commander of the airfield at Heidelberg. Instead, DA called me and said, "Your orders are canceled." And we'd already sold our second car. Said, "But we have I was on the promotion list to become a major." They said, "But we have an opening, we have a position for a major in Alaska." And I said, "At Fort Richardson." And I said, "Where in the hell's that?" "Well, it's outside of Anchorage." And I said, "Well, what would I be doing up there?" "Well, they have a helicopter company up there, and since you're on the promotion list, when your promotion comes through, you'll take command of that company." And I said, "What kind of helicopters do they have?" And I had been checked out in the CH-34, that's a Sikorsky product. And they said, "Well, they have the CH-21, the old twin rotor, one up front and one back." I said, "I've never even been to one of those things." And they said, "Well, that's all right, we'll get you transitioned en route, and we'll send you to Fort Eustis, Virginia for the transitioning, and then on to Fort Lewis, and when your promotion comes through, you'll take charge of the company." Yeah, that's what happened. And my promotion came through a couple months after I arrived there, and I took command of the unit. But the ex-company commander, he didn't want to turn the company over to another, but it was by DA orders. And so they should have shipped him out. He became a thorn in my side, having the ex-company commander that had taken the unit from Fort Riley, Kansas to Alaska. But it worked out all right. General Michaelis was our commanding general there in Alaska. I didn't like him, but he must have given me a pretty good rating, because the wife had a back problem. They evacuated her to Letterman Hospital in San Francisco, and they wouldn't ship her back up to Alaska for some reason. So they evacuated, my daughter and I got to go on board the evac ship with her to Travis Air Force Base, and then on down to the Presidio. She had her back operation. I was assigned the second time to the Presidio, San Francisco. Great assignment. That's where I spent my last 4 years on active duty. While there, I got promoted to lieutenant colonel, and I was about ready to retire. I had to stay 2 more years when I accepted the promotion. And about 2 or 3 months before my retirement date, the 2 years it was up, I received a message offering me 2 more years of active duty. I had a friend that was in about the same boat that I was in, a reserve officer. They offered him 4 years. Well, if they would have offered me 4, then with my guard time, I would have been able to have retired with, with 30 years of service for pay, you know. And contacted a friend in D.C., and he said, "Well, George," he said, "I don't know, they might offer you 4, they might give it to you." He said, "All you can do is ask them about it." But he said, "I don't know." So I had a message sent requesting that instead of 2 years, that I would accept it if the 4 years was offered. I was never in a bargaining condition with Uncle Sam before. And the request came back, your request, NFC, not favorably considered. And so I put in for my retirement. I retired 1st of April, 1966. Uncle Sam's been paying me for a long time.
Now, I want to backtrack just a little bit.
Okay.
Talking about talking about going up on your flight, first flight of the morning, or we're leaving the next guy.
Yeah.
Run me through just the basic duties of the liaison pilot, a typical flight, what you would do.
Well, we take off. Only one of us, and one generally did it for each battalion. For the infantry regiment we were supporting, see, it's what it amounted to. 3 different combat commands is what it amounted to. And we would basically fly beyond the front line. It was a little safer just beyond the front line than right on the front line. And we were looking for enemy targets, troop concentrations, convoys, artillery firing, because if they fired their artillery, we could see the blast, gun blast, the muzzle blast, and we could adjust we had radio communication with our fire direction center. We could adjust artillery fire on the enemy artillery. And so I've talked to a couple of the infantry guys here since I've been here, and they love to see us overhead, because while we were overhead, generally the German artillery wouldn't fire their artillery. They learned the lesson, and so the guys on the ground like to see us up there. And so we finally learned, it didn't take us too long to learn, that we tried to stay away from railroad crossings, intersection of roads, that sort of thing, because the Germans had zeroed in on those spots, some of those spots, and if you flew over more than once, you were going to get some flack. And so, and generally we would do like lazy eights. Mm-hmm. We didn't maintain the same altitude, because they were also looking for that. And Dumpy Crenshaw, he got some fire. He brought back some holes in his Cub. So far, I was never hit. Never hit. I was fortunate. Lindley and Cornish, his observer, were the only fatalities that we had that I'm aware of the pilots and their observers. We were named liaison pilots at that time. Later, the designation was changed to Army Aviator, and at some point, I don't recall just when it was, the Army had the authority to award a pilot rating, but early on, that was not the case. And we would fly for generally 3 hours, because we had about 4 hours of fuel. And at the end of about 3 hours, the other pilot would come up and relieve the one who was flying over the front at that time. That's about it. We, like I told you earlier, we ended up, the division ended up just inside of Austria when the war ended.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for agreeing to sit down and tell me those stories. Fantastic stuff.
Appreciate it. I enjoyed doing it. Is there some place where I could get a copy of this?
Oh, yeah, I'll be sending you a DVD.
Oh, you will?
Yes, sir.
Ah, very good.